The Morristown Green, a central park echoing with the footfalls of Washington and his compatriots during the Revolutionary War, is not merely a serene escape, but a living testament to the town's pivotal role in shaping our nation. Morristown's history seamlessly intertwines with every individual who grew up there, creating a childhood rich in the echoes of the past and a vibrant spirit of community carried forward by each successive generation. These are their stories. This is Beyond the Green.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Green, where we talk about the people and places of Morristown. My name is Peter, Morristown High School class of 1990. If you've watched the show before, you're thinking to yourself, hey, this show looks a little different today. It's because it is. We are sitting here in Convent Station, New Jersey, on the campus of St. Elizabeth's University, where we have formed a new collaboration with the university, and moving forward, we will be filming some of our episodes here. In the spirit of the Beyond the Green podcast, it is my pleasure to welcome our first guest in the studio. She is a fellow Morristown High School alumnus, class of 1989. Please help me welcome Kate McCabe, or otherwise known as Kate Lynch. Katie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This is exciting.
This is great to be here. Katie, you know, being a class of 89 alumnus, let's start, before we actually drill down on why you're here.
Sure.
Let's talk about growing up in Morristown. So, Where'd you grow up?
Mm-hmm. So I grew up on Farragut Place in the historic district across from the Kellogg Club. Mm-hmm. I lived on Farragut from 1971 to 1987. Okay. So I moved out to Springbrook before I graduated high school. And I went through the Moore School District. I went to TJ, I went to Woodland, and then TJ, and then Frelinghuysen, and then the high school, class of 89. It's absolutely wonderful.
So looking back at your high school career.
Sure.
Did you do any sports?
Yeah.
What'd you do?
I did. I played soccer and lacrosse and was on the swim team.
Nice.
And I was in the school play.
But thinking back, was there any one or two teachers that really made an impact for you?
Oh, absolutely. I think I'm not alone in just being in awe of Anton Schultzke in the history department.
Sure.
And when he retired in 1996, he gave me a call at the school where I was teaching, and he asked if I was interested in applying for the position that he was retiring from. And I said, absolutely. So I became a teacher at the high school in 1996 and stayed there till 2001. And it was just a tremendous honor to be able to kind of try to fill his shoes. I mean, I failed miserably because nobody could have ever. But what then was amazing is I was able to work at the high school with some like true legends in the history department. Skip Verinder, Jim Beaver, George Bellis, Kathy Kelly, Marianne Cobb, Gene Podeswa, John Harris. I mean, just total rock stars, right? And they were all kind of, while I was there, a lot of them retired. But it was nice to be able to see kind of behind the curtain of what it was like when I was there as a student, and then have those same folks be my colleagues and friends.
What was that like for you? When your first day, you started there.
Yeah.
And now you're on the other side of the fence. Was it weird for you walking through the halls?
No, the weirdest thing was that I had just gotten married like 2 weeks before school started. Okay. And so I stumbled over introducing myself with my married name. So that was like the toughest challenge to adjust to. But it was fine. I mean, it was... People, I've had the opportunity to work with former students as well. Sure. And it's totally normal from the teacher side, but from the student side, it's a little strange. Took me a little bit of time to call people by their first name. Of course. It worked out.
I went for the first time, so I graduated a year after you.
Yeah.
Last year, almost a year ago was the first time I went back. I was asked to go do some footage for the Heritage Club.
Sure.
And it was the first time I went back since graduation.
Okay.
Driving down was I couldn't tell you why. I was extremely nervous.
Okay.
And I couldn't tell you why.
All right.
Almost like it was the first day of school.
Okay.
And I walked in there, and I'm just like my heart's pounding away. But once you're in there for half hour, you're like, okay.
Yeah, I know where everything is.
Yeah,
I know where the bathrooms are.
Exactly. The only thing that I found odd was that, the lockers used to be color-coded for each floor. Yep. And now they're all single-color now.
Yeah, it's disorienting.
It's very disorienting.
But the signage is still different for each floor. Yeah. I mean, I taught there for 5 years, and then more recently, I taught in the community school classes for folks interested in passing the citizenship test. And so then I was back again. Yeah. and it just was like some things, and kids were still... When I was teaching classes, they were at the night. Kids were still like making sets for the musical, like in the hallway, And there's still such a hub of activity, 14 hours a day, every day, which is wonderful.
Yeah. So let me just ask you this before we move on.
Yeah.
If you were to, night before high school graduation, so June of 1989.
Yeah.
If you can go back to the night before graduation and slip yourself a note,
okay.
What would that note say?
Oh, so many things. I think it would say you're on the right track, because I don't. I was as an educator for 25 years, and I retired in 2019. And one of the primary reasons why I became a teacher was because Gail Young, who was an English teacher at the high school, was incredibly helpful for me, just personally. And she wasn't even my teacher. She just looked out for me, which I was so grateful for. And when I became a teacher so that I could kind of repay the favor, right? To look out for other kids when they needed someone the most. And I was able to do that. And that was as frustrating as it can be to be a teacher and a high school principal, knowing that you were in the right spot at the right time for the kids that needed you to be there was just an absolute gift and a treasure. Yeah. So that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a teacher before I graduated high school, and so it would be like, yeah, you're doing the right thing. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So let's move on to why we're here. So
what I've done after being a teacher, what I've decided to spend my life doing since I retired.
So you have recently put on a lecture about the history of Headquarters Plaza being built. Yep. Which you put on at the library here in Morristown. First, what motivated you to dig down there? I can't imagine, and as you say, you love history. Is it something that you just kind of rolled out of bed one day and said, "Hey, I want to do this"? How did we get here?
Yeah, that's a great question, because when I talk to folks that didn't grow up in Morristown, and they say, "Oh, what are you doing in your time now that you're not teaching?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm researching the history of a parking garage." And they sort of look at me like, "What? Have you lost your mind?" And it's hard to explain how important that whole site, the history of that site, is for the town of Morristown, and how much emotion is still wrapped up in it, and how many strongly held beliefs people have about it. I mean, I suppose, huge disclaimer before we get into the story, none of this has to do with the current owners of HQ Plaza. Olnick and Fisher, they are separate from the whole story. Yeah. And in fact, when they arrive on the scene, things sort of settle down, and they're not really part of the story. I mean, they are part of the story. They own it, obviously. It's theirs now. And so, but I don't know if anybody's like really that emotionally concerned or invested about their participation, because I think they've done a perfectly fine job running it. So that's not the interest. It's not there's nothing about them really that's part of the story, except they won the bid and they built it. But all of the stuff that came before it was really, it's fascinating for me Well, first off, this whole thing started because I would often tell tales of growing up in Morristown, and people, would say, "Oh, you should write a book, right, about growing up in Morristown." I usually took that as a cue of like, okay, I've heard enough. Sure. If you want to say anything else, put it down on paper. Maybe I'll read it. So I'd always take that as a cue to stop talking. But I have always been a writer. It's always been my creative outlet, fiction, nonfiction. I've always got a project going. And I usually just like print them out and put them on a shelf and, whatever. It's just the process I enjoy. So when I retired from teaching, I thought, well, let me finally write this story, right? And growing up in the historic district, and every neighborhood in Morristown is different, and so I'm sure everyone has their own neighborhood specific stories. But growing up in the historic district in the 70s was wild because you had these massive houses, right? So 6, 7, 9 bedrooms. I was really good friends with I still really am very good friends with Claudia Infinito, and they lived in the Thomas Nast house, right? And there was 11 bedrooms, right? And so that's an insane number of bedrooms for any house to have. But we were just kids running around, in this neighborhood, and I remember very distinctly a morning where Claudia and I were huge swimmers. We swam at the Kellogg Club all the time. And so we literally would sleep in our bathing suits. That's not hygienic or good or anything I should probably share. But we were just running around in our bathing suits all day, every day. We slept in them. We didn't care. Right. And I remember Mrs. Infinito waking us up. We were sleeping on the porch attached to the side of the house. And she's waking up. She's like, "You're still in your bathing suits?" And I was like, "What? Is that a problem?" And nowadays, when you study or look at the history of the Thomas Nast house, that porch where we were just little scruffy kids in our bathing suits, that porch is 750 panes of glass. It's incredibly architecturally significant, and we were just when's breakfast? It was a bizarre place to grow up, and it was and like I said, the Kellogg Club was right in the middle of it, and the swim team was there. And I remember one summer in particular that the swim team had a spectacular season. So I thought, well, that's the summer. I mean, if I write this book about Morristown, growing up in Morristown, I'm going to write about the summer of 1982, right? It was Bad News Bears in swimsuits. And I thought, well, let me get a subscription to the Daily Record and archives and see what was playing at the community theater, because the fact... Do you remember the Great Dane eating the popcorn out of the bins at the community theater, right? That's a very Morristown-specific memory. So that kind of thing, I was like, well, what's playing? And I started seeing the names of the adults on my street, in the newspaper. And I thought, well, maybe that's why they were never home, and we never knew where, no one knew where any of their kids were. But what were they up to? And then I started interviewing them. And so I interviewed Bud Fair and Dave Cook and Ann McDade. And Ann McDade is a spectacular human being. She was a librarian for 25 years. Before that, she was a detective in the prosecutor's office. Wow. And before that, she lived on Farragut, up the street from me. Okay. And she was 100% convinced that there was organized crime involved in the construction of Headquarters Plaza. Okay. So I immediately record scratch, my whole memoir thing out the window. I'll write it later. I got to figure out what she's talking about. And so that's where the whole thing started. Okay. And so I was and I like putting puzzles together. And so this was the ultimate puzzle.
Now, is that her feeling about that? Does it stem from her being working in law enforcement? Did she see something that connected the dots for her?
So this all happened before she became a detective, but she had been, she had worked at the CIA. Okay. And she was going to...
Should we be saying that?
Yeah. This is back in the day. She was going to be assigned to a desk in Cairo. Okay. And sort of keep an eye on the Soviets, right? Sure. And instead she got married and moved to Morristown. And so she was trained. Okay. And she wasn't wrong. So, spoiler, she wasn't wrong. And so, in order to, she had her sights set on one particular person named Stanley Buglione, who was the town sanitarian. And so she got herself a position on the Board of Health and started keeping an eye on him there. Okay. And, she wasn't wrong. So.
Okay. So this is what we're in 19. So what year is this? Is this recently that you had this conversation?
So I interviewed her in 2020.
Okay.
And then from there, I started, the whole story.
Okay. So then the story starts 1965?
So when you're talking about the Headquarters Plaza project, you're talking about 11 acres in the middle of town, bordered by Speedwell, Spring Street, and Water Street.
Right.
And back in 1964, the mayor, whose name was E. Marco Sterone, wanted to do something with that whole section of town. And the people in town were concerned about the malls popping up. They were concerned about the retail districts on Route 10. And they thought Morristown would lose its commercial viability, its retail, power, its retail sort of business, if they didn't do something. And particularly what they needed was a parking lot. And the folks on the street were they were in support of that. They thought they needed a parking lot as well.
Sure.
They wanted like a 300-car garage. They didn't necessarily think that they needed a 3,200-car garage, or which was talked about at one point. But so that there was some energy behind doing something about parking and doing something about that particular part of town. And the plan at first was to build a mall with a parking lot.
Okay.
And that was like the early, and call it the Kennedy Center, because that was what the plan was in 1964. That ultimately obviously changed, but that was the original idea.
Okay.
Oh, and one thing about, like, there's a lot of questions and a lot of discussion you could have about why that particular part of town, because why not, like, over on the other side of town, why not off of South Street, right?
Yep.
Like, South Street has flat land. You could just put a garage up and
sure.
like, why put it in like this weird gully? And if you think about town and you think about going off Speedwell from the green up Speedwell, back in the day, it was a series of buildings not unlike South Street, where there was like retail on the first floor and apartments or offices above it. But it was a pretty thriving retail district, but it was also kind of more practical, right?
Yeah.
Like, you get tires, you can get tailors were there. There was an undertaker, there was a bowling alley. And it was there was a lot of Jewish merchants, right? A lot of Jewish families owned shops on Speedwell.
Okay.
And so you have there's like kosher deli. There was people sold live chickens. Like, I heard about the live chickens a lot. Somebody was like, wasn't there live chickens and there's sawdust on the floor? Like, there was a thriving but somewhat like down to earth kind of aspect to Speedwell. And if you think about that in comparison to South Street, South Street had the National Iron Bank, it had the Church of the Redeemer, it had the library, it had the Lyceum, it had, a much more sort of, I guess, a more affluent type upscale business, interest. And so that's one factor. Another factor was because everything's built on a hill, things were starting to like crumble and not be taken care of. And so it was a little bit of a mess. And then also you have the section of like the hollow is right north of that. And so that was the earliest plans didn't include any way for people in the north part of town to access the green, right? So where Water Street is, that didn't exist in the original plans. They were going to do away with Water Street. Yeah. So imagine living, on Evergreen Avenue, it was, as MLK was called back in the day, and using Water Street to get to town, and then all of a sudden the town comes up with, we're going to buy everything in this area, tear it down, and build a parking garage, and you won't be able to get to town.
Yeah.
Like, that's unbelievable. And Water Street was eventually put back in.
Yeah.
So
how long after, there was a fire there that created the hole in the ground?
The hole was actually there from before that. There's a couple of fires for different buildings, but so this is something that fascinates people, is that that weird little creek that runs behind the bleachers at the high school?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So that actually drains from Burnham Pond.
Yeah.
and then goes under Speedwell.
Right.
And drains into, there was a pond
Right.
in that area, and that ultimately goes into the Whippany River.
Right.
And it still does today.
Yeah.
Right. So that's still there. And there are apparently tunnels under Speedwell.
Yeah, the Prohibition tunnels.
Right. Do not recommend anyone ever exploring them. You go, oh, let's go check it out. No, do not check it out. Do not, 0 out of 10. So that was part of the reason why the area was kind of unsightly. It's because there was a pond there, and during
Right.
Prohibition, they threw their mash from their distilleries there.
Right.
And the story was you could stand by the pond on sunny days and get drunk from the fumes.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's a little bit unkempt, I should say.
Yeah. So going back to building the project.
Mm-hmm.
So in those early days of planning, what was there outrage in the community that they were even planning? Because it seems like it was like a double-edged sword almost, because you had people worried about the business sector losing to, like you said, the larger malls, to the strip malls on Route 10. So there was advocates and proponents and opponents to it. I'm assuming to this were the ones who were for it, a greater voice for this, or was it a constant battle between the two?
That's a great question. So there were definitely people who were in favor of it, and obviously. And there were people like the head of the Chamber of Commerce was giving talks at the Women's Club about this will be great for Morristown.
Okay.
There's also a tremendous amount of optimism that it's going to be really quick and really cheap. In 1965, they said the whole project would be done by Christmas of 1967, that people would be buying their Christmas presents in the mall in 1967, and that it would cost $4 million, and $3 million of it would be paid by the federal government. And it was going to generate $10 to $20 million in tax in ratables every year.
Yeah.
Right? So there's this great optimism about that. There's not everyone is in favor of it. The merchants themselves were kind of okay with it.
Okay.
There wasn't a lot of opposition at first. They wanted a parking garage. They thought they could move their shops into this mall. It was just kind of going to be a reorganization, a temporary dislocation, but a reorganization, and it would be ultimately fine. As the project kind of stalled, by 1968, the merchants are concerned because they don't know when the project's going to happen. They don't know if they should bring in more inventory or hire more people or where they're going to go. And then there's nowhere to go, right? There's some of them relocate onto Ridgedale. Some of them find other shops, but some of them go out of business, right? So there's more frustration from the merchants themselves as the time goes on. The folks who, launched the most organized opposition to it are the folks living in the Hollow. And in particular, a woman by the name of Jane Edwards was a tremendous leader in terms of organizing the community to really express their opinions. And at the unveiling of the Urban Renewal Project in August of 1965, people were marching back and forth in front of the Urban Renewal Office with signs saying, where are we going to go? When is the Whippany River Project going to be started? And the famous quote from James Baldwin, urban renewal means Negro removal. And so there is absolutely opposition to it. There's an account of the time that said that when Jane Edwards went to the unveiling, she was so upset, she couldn't speak, and how awful this would be in her eyes. And so that, and she was also, in that summer in 1965, tremendously busy trying to get the town to do something about the conditions in public housing.
Right.
And that obviously is still an issue in town. But so there was this chasm between folks who wanted town-owned housing to be inhabitable, and then asking for the sewer pipes to be hooked up and the pests to be addressed and exterminated, and instead of getting that, they hear the town's going to spend $4 million on a mall that you don't have a door to get into unless you walk all the way around the whole block. And so that was a kick in the teeth. So
it's kind of interesting because it was almost like it seems like almost like class warfare in a way, that they were putting this up, forgetting those residents of the Hollow almost, and they're almost kind of like dismissing them and their wants and their needs there. As the town, I'm saying, were they dismissing what those people needed down there?
I think if you are on MLK and you get to that light at Spring Street, and you look up at the towers and the parking garage as it exists, you can't think that's welcoming.
Yeah, no, not at all. It's like a wall.
It's like a wall.
Yeah, it's a wall. It
shuts off the sunlight. It's really quite the installation. I think that there was, again, optimism that there would be jobs, that there would be, shops to work out in the mall. And so, rising tide lifts all boats kind of thing.
Yep.
And so there's no there's no one that's intentionally cruel, right? Like there's none of that. And that's what sort of was surprising to me, hearing about this project growing up and trying to, piece together the story of all of the shenanigans that go into its construction, and sort of thinking I'm going to hate the people who did it, right? And that these people were inept in what they did to the town, and and then realizing that really there wasn't a bad soul among them, right? It just was like an avalanche, and they were just trying to stay on top of it. Yeah. So it is really again, everybody associated with the project. Marco Sterone and then Ray DiSciascio, who becomes the executive director of urban renewal, loved Morristown as much as anyone has ever loved Morristown. Yeah. And so it's not, and people just praise them, and people, so maybe they made the wrong decision sometimes, but they're good, they were good people. And so that, try to give everyone a little grace about it. But it was ridiculous. Yeah. The whole thing was ridiculous. It's not finished until the mid-'80s. Yeah. And so 22 years of just a pit. I mean, you remember the whole...
Yeah, I remember it, Right? And then, like you said, and all of a sudden, then they started building. Mm-hmm. So was that long delay, was it legal battles? What really caused the delay? Was it inconsistency with the plans? Was it just the community pushing back? Because it seems like there was such an urgency, like you said, to build a parking garage, to bring retail.
Yeah.
Was it the corruption that slowed it down? What do you think, in what you've researched, what do you think were the key points to slowing it down so much?
I think the initial delays were caused by the fact that the town had too much other stuff going on. They were still building public housing in the Hollow. They were still building the housing on Upper Flagler. Okay. So there's a little bit of a delay there. And then by the time you get to 1970 and 71, there's enough opposition that Mayor Catano pulled together a blue ribbon panel to investigate the whole thing. And the blue ribbon panel was like, yeah, town doesn't really know what it's doing, but let's keep going. And then in 1973, Emilio Gervasio is elected mayor, and he's like, we're stopping this. This whole thing is a mess. Okay. So that's kind of the delay at the beginning. And then in 74, the developer sues the town because the town wasn't doing what it was supposed to be doing according to the contract, and wins $2.5 million, right? So that's another year of delay. And then in 1977, the developer goes bankrupt. Okay. And so then you have to start all over. And then there's bids for different, how the project's going to go. And that's where Olnick and Fisher, the people who ultimately build it, come in then. And so you have, to answer your question, basically, yes. There's some opposition. There's some, the town's a little overwhelmed. The people are doing too many things. There's too many balls in the air. And then there's some ineptitude on the part of the developer. And then, ultimately gets finished. And by the time Olnick and Fisher come along, they kind of wrap it up and it's done.
And then it finally gets built.
Yeah, then it gets built.
Yeah.
So
looping back to what you were talking about, organized crime.
Yeah, where do they come in?
Yeah, like let's drill down a little bit on that. Like, are we talking like Italian crime families from New York?
Okay.
I just opened up the can of worms.
Yeah. So I'm not necessarily somebody that spends a lot of time researching the mafia. There are people out there who do.
Okay.
And so I may get something wrong. So
Okay.
you might get some comments from folks. But I knew enough to know that there's like the 5 families, right? And that there's like they sort of collaborate on some things.
Okay.
They have like a commission that sort of discusses disputes, right? Somewhat somewhat orderly in their collaboration /
Sure.
carving out of territories. If you think of them those families as having like solid members, like made men, right?
Yeah.
People who are part of it. There's also people who are like contractors, right?
Okay.
Who are not in the families necessarily, but they'll show up for jobs.
Yeah.
And the folks that were connected to Morristown's urban renewal project are the contractors, right? So
Okay.
when I tried to set about finding out like which crime family was connected to Morristown,
Yeah.
and it turns out that those contractors who are connected to Morristown were part of like the Lucchese. They did jobs for like the Lucchese family, the Campeses, the Bruno family out of Philadelphia, and then maybe the Genovese crime family. And so there's, but again, like they're like extras. They're like non-player characters in a way. But and the first time that becomes part of the story.
Mm-hmm.
That I can document, right? Because there's a lot of things people will tell you
Sure.
that you can't document. But Stanley Buglione, who Anne had her eyes on, was arrested
Okay.
and put on trial 3 separate times for stealing the dirt from the construction site. Now, that's a ludicrous thing to be charged with.
But there's money to be made in dirt.
There is money to be made in dirt. There totally is. And there's a lot of money. If you run a construction site and you need fill, right, you got to pay for that. And so if you can get cheap fill, if you can get free fill, right, like you're psyched. And so people found out that they could get fill from Stanley, and they would roll their trucks into the hole in the middle of town, and they'd fill up their trucks, and they'd write them a check, and then they'd take their fill. And so the state police were like, you can't do that. Like, you can't just sell the fill from this site. And they charged him with stealing dirt from the town of Morristown. They had him dead to rights. They had the checks. They had the guys driving the trucks. They had eyewitnesses. They had everything. And his defense was that the town didn't own the dirt, which is a ludicrous thing to say. But basically, he said in the contract, the town basically gave the developer the dirt, and so really I was stealing from him. And the developer didn't show up for his day in court, so we don't know what he thought about Stanley stealing the dirt.
Right.
But like I said, he's put on trial 3 times. The first time, the trial's coming to a conclusion, and one of the prosecutors meets Stanley in the hall and says, why are you taking the fall for those guys? Like, why don't you just turn state's evidence and give us the skinny on the guys above you?
Yeah.
And Stanley goes to the judge and says, I feel threatened. I have chest pains. I got to go to the hospital. And so mistrial. So the first trial ended in mistrial. The second trial, the judge at the outset, because he knew Stanley's defense was going to be that the town didn't own the dirt.
Sure.
So the judge is like, I don't want to hear it. Town owns the dirt. Don't come at me with that mess. And the jury comes back and they're like, does it though? Does the town really own the dirt? And so hung jury, second trial. Now Stanley is employed by the town this whole time. Like he's still the town health inspector, which is again absolutely ridiculous. But he wasn't convicted, so innocent until proven guilty. And then the third trial, the judge at the outset is like, town doesn't own the dirt, case closed. And so he's free.
Okay.
And goes back to being the town health inspector. And so that was kind of the first go-round that there was evidence that Stanley was in the thick of it. And then between 1974 and 1977, he's charged with 4 different crimes, trying to rig the bids at the Dover, for Dover garbage trucks, selling hookups to the sewer system, like literally asking for people to bring bags of cash to meet him at the Morristown Diner, Then he tries to get the reevaluation, right? Like, it's just amazing. It's such a 1970s Morristown story. It's unbelievable. And then he tries to get Dover to give their like tax reevaluation contract to one of his buddies. And then he tried to shake down All Souls Hospital. He went to them and he said, if you don't get my buddies in waste management the contract for hauling your garbage, I'm going to shut you down for being unsanitary, right? Because he was the town health inspector. He had that leverage. And so All Souls went to the police or the prosecutor's office, and so that was the fourth crime that he was prosecuted for. And what's fascinating is he went to jail in 2 different stints for those crimes because he was actually convicted of those. And he gets out for the first 2, and he's sentenced almost immediately for the next 2.
Okay.
And he said to Judge Reginald Stanton,
here in Morristown.
In Morristown.
Yeah.
Judge Stanton was like, you've, betrayed the public trust.
Sure.
I want your life to be a message to other public officials to not be corrupt. And Stanley's like, don't send me back to jail. It's really lonely. I've disgraced my family. Please don't send me back to jail. And he goes, but I can't say I won't commit another crime, right? And so like it's just absolutely like ridiculous. So Judge Stanton is like, yeah, okay, and so sends him back to jail.
Yeah.
And then the story goes that when he's sent to jail for that second time, he's reunited with his childhood friend Nicholas Nicky Boy Valvano, who once famously was losing a poker game at a bar in Lakewood, New Jersey, and reached across the table to the guy who was beating him and bit his ear off. So, like, Nicky Boy was a character. Anyway, so the 2 of them eventually do a whole lot of criminal activity under the umbrella of an organization called Concern for the Handicapped.
Okay.
So by 1983, they are arrested for running up to $150,000 of methamphetamine and methaqualone in Morris County.
Wow.
$150,000 a week.
Wow.
Yeah, not great.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's basically...
Oh, and part of the best part of that is that Ann McDade, at that point, had become a detective in the prosecutor's office.
Okay.
And as part of the investigation, wore a wire to take down Stanley. So
good for her.
She's my hero.
Going back to the drug part, and the funny thing is, when you think about that era, where you have the famously just say no to drugs.
Sure.
And and you hear going to school here in Morristown, you would hear about the drugs here and there. It wasn't an everyday thing. You knew that they were there, but they weren't necessarily in your face. But then to hear about, here's an individual connected.
It's absolutely connected. And in fact, as part of when Stanley and Nicky Boy are arrested in 1983, it's a federal DEA raid that arrests about 40 people. And one of the people that's arrested was a black man from New Jersey, from Morristown, who was brought into the leadership of the organization in order to handle the black chapter in Morristown. And so it was specifically targeting the black community. Like, they deliberately were like selling drugs into the community intentionally. And so it's is targeted for the population. It was, something that was insidious and, incredibly destructive.
Yeah.
And so it's not good.
No.
It's not good at all.
No. It's very, when you think about it, it's very, I don't like to use the word, but very stereotypical of looking back of the 80s, the whole drug situation and how they went into the inner cities and basically drugs destroyed the inner cities, not only here in Morristown, but also in not only in the state of New Jersey, but across the country.
Right. And I mean, Stanley himself was, the newspaper account said he was doing cocaine 8 or 9 times a day. So it's not good choices being made, across the board. Stanley ultimately, though, turned state's evidence.
Good for him.
Goes into witness protection and does eventually take the prosecutor's office, advice and like rat out the people above him. And he spends the rest of his life in witness protection. And so,
do we know, is he still alive? We have no
not.
idea. He's not. No, he's passed away.
Yeah. So, But yes, I mean, with that kind of choices, he wasn't really living like a
No,
healthy.
no, not at all.
Wasn't like running.
He
Eating
was on borrowed time to begin with.
Right. No.
So we get in. So now we're in the early 80s, and it starts getting built. Okay, and we start. I remember 83, 84. We start seeing construction and the tower slowly. And I remember as a kid, at the time, I was 11, 12 years old. When it was just a hole, it was big, but as a kid I remember, okay, it's just a kind of a hole in the ground. But it wasn't really until they started the foundation and building up where you really started recognizing the magnitude of this project. Because like you said, as you come down MLK towards Spring Street now, you really didn't see, you couldn't imagine how high this building would be until now you see it, and you're sitting at it now. When the building started getting built like that, do you think, was there pushback then when people really recognized the magnitude of the project?
I think one of the things that's really important to recognize in the history of the project is that it had about 6 or 7 different iterations, right? There were different plans for it along the way. And so, you know, it wasn't entirely clear until Olnick and Fisher come along. And even when they won the bid to build the project, their plan included 2 towers, a hotel, a huge like promenade, you know, plaza where people could hang out, and a pedestrian walkway over Speedwell to North Park Place, right? So that was their plan. And then what ultimately gets built is something entirely different. And so there was opposition to having, you know, such high towers. They really are out of scale for most of the town. There were other plans before they arrived to build towers in town, and people didn't like them. Like there was one plan that there was supposed to be like an office complex across the street from King's, where the Blair House apartments are, and that was shot down. There's a lot of opposition to that. And it's so funny because that was like in the late 60s, and they were like, well, what about our TV antennas? Will we still get reception? You're like, oh, yeah, that's right. It all came from antennas back in the day. And so there was really, it was supposed to be much lower rise buildings. There were supposed to be apartments. There were supposed to be a swimming pool at one point. It's not what they set out to build, you know, is not what's actually there.
And I don't recall, Tom, I don't know if it was you, I don't know if it was Ted France who told me this, but the original site of the hotel was where the theater was. One of the plans called for was not where it was today.
So that's one of the things that I find really heartbreaking about the project is what was lost. And I, you know, born in 1971, didn't realize, but people will remember it, that there was a park theater next to the Presbyterian Church on the green. And there was a little bit of a plaza there. And then there was a municipal building and a firehouse, and that's where 1776 is now. And so that was one of the first things to go. And on the other side, by Spring Street and Speedwell, there was a diner. There was supposed to be a post office at that point. I mean,
up where the CVS, where the Lincoln dealership was,
but across the street, like where closer to where the movie theater is now. Right, that side. And so that was the original plan. They were just going to build a post office and a little parking garage, and that was going to be it. And then it morphed into this massive thing. And so there was another theater across the street. There were a lot of shops that were taken down, a lot of buildings. A couple of the buildings were moved out to Speedwell Village, but most of it was destroyed. And so there was a lot lost. And a lot of people remember fondly, you know, shopping on Speedwell. So.
And I think we talked about this off air about specifically the old firehouse there, that there was a fire there.
There was.
And we there was always talk, did someone set the fire?
So the newspaper accounts I found had the police chief saying it was deliberately set.
Yeah.
But that was the end of it. I kept looking in the newspaper after that. So maybe I just missed it, but I never found the proof of like who set it. And I think that fire happened after they knew that they were going to have to move the firehouse to a different location. And they weren't sure where they were going to move it. They eventually moved it down Speedwell.
Yeah.
But there was a fire. There was also a fire in one of the buildings on Speedwell. So they tore down all the businesses and the retail shops, and it was a tremendous loss. But there were also apartments above those buildings, above those shops, and people lived in them. And there wasn't a lot of places for them to go. So sometimes they doubled up with friends and family. Sometimes they moved out of town. But there's this weird time period where the houses were condemned, the buildings were owned by the town, but they were empty, and people needed a place to go. And so the town let people move back in. And then there's a fire in one of those buildings, and the town hears the rumors of there were squatters in these buildings, and there's people living there illegally because how the buildings had been condemned. The town put them back in. The town authorized for them to move back into those houses, even though they didn't have certificates of occupancy. They were already condemned as being uninhabitable.
Yeah.
But that was a big scandal as well, that other fire, and people were like, no, they were allowed to be there. They weren't squatting.
So let me get this straight. So these
impossible.
these houses were condemned.
Yeah.
Now, where were the landlords of these homes?
So that's
because it seems like they went in there, they eminent domain the property,
Yeah.
and then they're like, oh, people need to live somewhere, and they put them back in there.
That's exactly what happened.
I want to know, why did the town eminent domain them? Because didn't the landlords or the property owners have property rights to them, or did they just abandon the properties at that point in time?
That's a fantastic question, and there's not a lot of opposition from the property owners, right?
Okay.
And part of that has to do with the fact that they get paid pretty generously.
Right.
Part of it has to do with the fact that they're not residents in the buildings. A lot of times tenants were being pushed out, and so maybe they offloaded the headache of being landlords.
Sure.
It sort of seemed to be inevitable, right? That this was going to happen. I don't think you could do the same thing now.
No.
Because people would be opposed to the idea of spending that much money. They would object to the loss of their property. And plus, it's an absolutely absurd project for a town to undertake, because it's not... the fact that they ultimately turned it over to Olnick and Fisher was not what they originally planned to do. They planned to own the parking garage and run it as a Morristown Parking Authority garage.
Sure.
And so it was let's tear down everything and build a parking garage. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It was a ridiculous idea. But they thought it would be a good idea.
So now we're in 87 now, and the building.
And we're going to the movies, seeing Die
Hard. We're going to movies, and I remember as a senior, where we were allowed to go off campus, we would walk there for lunch at the food court. Yeah, because I remember when it first opened, they had a fabulous food court there, right? And now we're here, 40-something years before opening, and now they're remodeling it and trying to bring it back to some sort of, I don't want to call it glory, but remember, retail went in, and then soon thereafter, by the time we hit early 90s, a lot of businesses left.
In high school, I worked at the Crabtree in Evelyn.
Oh, did you?
I don't think I ever saw the owner.
Yeah.
I had a key. I sat there watching all the soap. It wasn't really
there was restaurants.
Busy.
There was restaurants like Postabilities was there.
Yeah.
And I reminded my brother the other, when he was in town last, I'm like, don't you remember there used to be a Bennigan's here?
Yep, Bennigan's was smoking.
It was hopping at the time, But it was just but now you see it. So just to get some quick thoughts on some things. Redoing all this research, you've seen the 20-something year delay to get this built.
Yeah.
And now you drive through town.
Yeah.
And you drive down Moore Street where, Burger King was and Danziger's Bakery. and you see the projects
Yeah.
that are coming into town now and how quickly they're being built. What are your thoughts on that? Because you don't live in town anymore. You live.
I
You
live in Chatham.
live in
I lost the
Chatham.
coin toss with my husband. Yeah, he's a Chatham
But
kid, born and raised.
knowing what you know now,
Yeah.
and you see these buildings going up,
Yeah.
what do you think? Not necessarily what at the quickness
Yeah.
that the planning board now in town is pushing these up.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about that?
So first I was laughing because I don't know how long it's going to take me until I no longer refer to it as where the Burger King was, because I remember going there as a kid. Like, that's just going to be like,
That was the
there's a
place.
Burger King in the 7-Eleven, and that's where that was. So to some extent, like, growth is inevitable, right? And change is inevitable. When I was working in Jersey City, I had the great fortune of meeting and becoming friends with Paul Silverman, who is a developer. And there was a part of Jersey City that had a park that was kind of run down, but it had some buildings around it. And he went and approached some of the building owners to see if he could acquire the properties. And he was able to do so. He was able to work with the town to fix up the park. And he had this apartment building. And their tagline for the company is building neighborhoods, right? So Paul's really smart. And he was like, I have young couples, I have young marrieds.
Yeah.
They're going to need an obstetrician. So he went out and recruited an obstetrician and to come into one of the office spaces he had. And he's like, and then they're going to need a pediatrician. So we found a pediatrician. And he went out to dinner from his favorite restaurants and persuaded the owners to open second locations in his neighborhood. Then he gave some of his office space to a school, right, preschool.
Sure.
And to that extent, the people had a community. Like, he orchestrated, engineered a community so people would stay, right? And that to me is genius, right? Maybe not like totally good for the bottom line in terms of like giving space at a lower rent. I don't know what he charges rent, but like, you give space at a lower cost to a preschool, right? Like, in order to make sure that people stay. So maybe not everything is immediately good for the bottom line, but it's ultimately good for the community. Sure. And so I don't know if that type of intentional, like, livable, walking, walkable, access to services type of planning is existing in some of the development. Like, people want to be able to be in communities where they see people and it's they see their friends and they walk around. And Morristown is always like that. Like, growing up, you always like walk downtown, right? Like, I'm going to go uptown and I'm going to go to Jodo's gift shop and I'm going to buy jelly beans, right? Like, there's so much of that when people are nostalgic about Morristown, it's about going into the shops. It's about seeing your neighbors. And my husband and I own an ice cream shop. And when I see people run into each other there, or like somebody brings their granddaughter for the first time and their friends are there and then they're all cooing about their granddaughter, like, that to me is the heart of what makes a town a home. And so that is one of the things that I think we lose when we depend upon, like, everyone's driving their automobiles, everyone's getting in and out of town by car, and that of course exacerbates the traffic problems. And so there's a way in which livable, walkable cities are fantastic. I'm not saying Morristown is a city, but I mean, like, that kind of town vibe is what people like, and I wish it were more like obvious in terms of the development plan.
Sure. Because you remember back when we were, we'd walk on the green, and for those, there's some people who may remember, there's some people who may not. When those buildings went up, one of their largest occupants was AT&T.
Yep.
As AT&T, for those who are old enough to remember, owned a lot of the office buildings in Morris County. Yep. A lot, like probably 80% was owned them. So during lunchtime, you'd walk out there on the green, and it was packed. Someone told me there used to be I believe on the South Street side of the green, there used to be the hot dog vendor there.
Yep.
And eventually there was one that went on the other side where the Presbyterian Church was. At one point in time, I can't verify numbers. Somebody told me that they were each making $1 million a year selling
Good for
hot
them.
dog.
Yeah.
But again, different time,
God bless
different
them.
place.
Yeah.
And I think when you have companies like Sanofi coming in, where they are moving 1,900 employees from their Bridgewater campus that is coming in here, you're going to see that again. These people need to eat someplace.
Which is great. Yeah.
And, I can see people during their lunch breaks, you know, walking around the green again, like we used to remember it, you know. And then, of course, if you want to dig down on this project, I don't know if the planning board has approved it yet. I think they did because I saw some initial plans that they're going to remodel North Park Place there.
Finally, right?
Yeah. And talking in a historical aspect, and I hope somebody from the town can answer this question. Here's my, I'm all for progress, but it has to be done right.
Sure.
Okay? The placards that are on the Century 21 building.
Yeah.
That been there since Bambergers were there.
Yeah.
I want to know what's going to happen to those.
I don't know.
That's for me when you drove by.
Yeah.
I've been looking at them for 50 years now.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's people who've looked at them even longer.
Right.
I hope for the historical time, someone preserves them, whether they get reused, whether or not they get the Morristown Museum takes them. Somebody needs.
There's an idea. Yeah.
Somebody needs to take and preserve them.
Yeah.
Because that is a part of not only, I think it's the history of the town. Though everybody up there is a Revolutionary War historic, from Hamilton to, to Jacobs to everybody we know that makes, Morristown history, We knew, the funny thing is growing up here, the Broadway show Hamilton made the Schuyler family. We knew who the Schuylers were before Lin Emanuel put them on Broadway and be like, hey, look at them,
And I think what's fascinating about, and I think it's also like, everyone probably remembers like, we went, like you got a field trip to the Washington's headquarters, and you definitely get blinded by the fact that all of those folks, spend so much time in Morristown, and it's just, like the air we breathe. But what's fascinating too is one of the really phenomenal parts for me about researching the Urban Renewal Project is that it sort of like looked away from those bright lights and looked at the other parts of the history. And there are so many things that happened in Morristown that are tremendously historically significant that you sort of lose sight of because the other things are so prominent. And so there's ways in which, I really loved digging into this project and I taught history for 20 years. I was a history major in college. I have a master's in American Studies focusing on New Jersey history, right? Like I've done some legwork, and then I was still amazed to discover things through this that I just had no idea were part of Morristown's history. And so, like Benedict Arnold's first court-martial happened in the Hollow, right? That like I didn't know that. Maybe other people did, but I didn't know that. And so there were things that, like one of the houses that was at the bottom of Spring Street, at the corner of Water Street and Spring Street, that's now at Speedwell Village, was the Moses Esty House, which he was a colonel in the Revolutionary War. He was wounded. George Washington told him specifically how to heal from it. Right, he survived that. And then he goes on to run a shop in town, and he's prominent member of town, and his kids marry the children of presidents, and he's significant in his own way. His grandmother was burned as a witch in Salem, right? And so when I now his house is pretty much empty in Speedwell Village. You can't really even access it, but that to me is you have these threads of U.S. history that come through Morristown and are incredibly important, and we don't necessarily know that because we're just looking at the highlights. And so I found it really, really fascinating. But there were times when I was researching this that I would literally gasp, in the library, poor James lives at the library, be like, what is she doing? I'd be like, I'm just amazed by the things that I found. And so there was a lot. It's it's an insane story.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed digging through it. But I think it's also what's fascinating to me is how many people still have very, intense beliefs about it.
Sure.
So.
Sure. I think at the end of the day, knowing the town that we grew up with, it really changed. It permanently changed Morristown and its look and its feel, where it made it. It came out of like somewhat semi-rural small town and brought it more into more suburban-esque feeling. And that's one of the biggest things that locals are saying now is with all these new structures going up, it's feeling less small town or suburban, and they don't want it to feel like a Hoboken or a Jersey City. And that's going to be a constant struggle between the mayor's office and the planning boards and the local residents, and not only here in Morristown, but you see it throughout the state, and that's constantly happening.
Right.
Before we wrap it up here, is there one question or one place that is no longer there that you miss in town?
The Park Theater. I mean, it's just heartbreaking to know that there was like.
It was supposed to be beautiful.
And I think it was. I mean, it might have fallen on hard times, kind of like the community theater with the Great Dane.
Yes.
Back in the day, but did you see how incredibly important the community theater is for the town now, right? And how wonderful it is. People love being able to go see all kinds of great acts there. And so if there were another facility, another place like that, it would really just, be even better for town. And so I think that's heartbreaking. I mean, I've heard so much about these live chickens. I wish I could have seen them in person. Like, if I get into a shop and there's live chickens running around.
This is the first. I'm going to find out more about
You're
these
going to hear a lot
chickens.
about the live chickens. Oh, my God.
And the funny thing about this, I can just imagine the smell coming out.
No. Wouldn't have been good. No.
You would have been good to go. But I would just love just to walk by to hear them, clucking at you,
Yeah. And I think there's also, for me, one of the things that I'm fascinated by is the way in which a lot of people don't know there's a lake in the middle of town. Like when you say like there's Pocahontas Lake, they're like, where is that?
Yeah.
You're like, it's right there.
It's right there, yeah.
Like maybe 400 yards away from the green, 500 yards, I don't know. But it's, and if any town had a lake in the middle of it, they'd probably do something with that. Like, and the Whippany River project was promised in the 1960s. It's never been undertaken, but basically Patriots Path runs next to it. And so a lot of people, through the decades have thought it'd be great if we could develop that in a way that's like a place you could go for walks, right? And be really beautiful. So it's not so much gone as kind of
forgotten a little bit.
Forgotten, overlooked.
Yeah.
And so I do wonder if that's ever going to come to fruition.
I think what the problem is, I think so much attention gets put on Speedwell Lake because that's more in your face. That there, you have to kind of take like Quarry Road, you go under, by Speedwell Village there to get to Lake,
it's gritty. And that whole part of town was gritty. It's always been the industrial site.
100%.
Yeah, that's why it's Coal Avenue, because they used to drop the coal there.
Exactly.
So it's always been, kind of a very industrial site. And so it has yet to, reach its sort of cleaned up version. Yeah. But it's nice. It's nice.
Oh, it is. It is.
Yeah,
and I think people, especially those people who are just moving into the area who are maybe watching this and are seeing this and like there's a lot of hidden things in town,
so many
that you just, even for those of us who grew up here, we're just kind of revisiting them. We knew about them but not really drilled down on them, and it's kind of nice.
It's great. And I think living in Morristown and growing up here, like you definitely see, it's almost like, did you ever watch Lord of the Rings?
Yeah.
Right. So you know in Lord of the Rings where they're like the fellowship is in the woods in the first part, and there's like random statues from like earlier civilizations, and they're kind of falling apart.
Yeah.
Like that is that's how Morristown feels for me.
Yeah.
Like you can be walking along and there's like a random, wall, or there's a random statue, or there's a random marble installation where the ladies used to step out of the stagecoaches, and like it's just there. You just ignore it. Everyone kind of keeps it moving, right?
Yeah.
You're like, there's so many like remnants of earlier civilizations and earlier, communities that have been through here that you're just like, it's steeped in, you don't even notice it. But then when you do pause and you look at it, you go, oh, that's what that is, and it's fascinating.
Yeah.
It's nice to be part of the story and potentially, moving forward to the next chapter.
Yeah. And my last question, I saw a post that you put on Facebook, and it's a year or so old.
Okay.
Talking about putting up female statues.
Ooh, yeah. There's not a single statue of a woman in Morris County.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. For you, you look at the historical aspect of it. So if you were to go and propose a statue, whether it be in the Green or somewhere else, what would that look like for you? Would you want to go in there? Would you want for the community to propose who that person would be? Do you already have in your mind who you're thinking of? Like, of course, you can have the Schylers there. You can have Martha Washington. I remember someone said, you could put a Molly picture or something like that. Do you stick to referring just to Morristown right now, do you stick just to the colonial history?
No.
Okay. So who would you think if you had like a top three? Who would you like to see a statue of?
Okay, so no, I would not stick to colonial history.
Okay.
My first thought.
Yeah.
And so, what I would love, if I could, if anyone wanted to listen to me, is there's that statue of Washington and Hamilton and Lafayette, right?
Yep.
Like I would love another statue of three people talking.
Okay.
But one of those people would have to be Beatrice Jenkins,
okay.
who is the woman who has her name as the first plaintiff in the lawsuit that created the Moore School District.
Okay.
Right. So.
Okay.
And I think that lawsuit, it's historic in terms of the nation's history, but it's also key to the creation of the community.
Sure.
That the schools provide. And then with her might be Jane Edwards, who is the hero from 1965, who tried to get better housing conditions for people in the Hollow. And then the third person would be maybe Julia Kersey, who was an activist and tremendous community leader for decades upon decades.
Okay.
Or Connie Montgomery, who was on the school board. I could go on and on. So Felicia Jameson. So I would love for that to be a representation of the true heroes that were connected to the community and also spent countless evenings advocating for folks to get a seat at the table. So they're my heroes. And so I would put them on the Green. But
have you ever proposed this idea to anybody?
Nobody listens.
Listen, you don't know.
I live in Chatham, and so I'm not.
That's
I don't
okay,
really have
though.
I don't
but listen,
have
if anybody in, if the mayor's office listening, the town council is listening, I think this is a great idea. Why not? Right? Why not?
Really cool.
You're creating. Let the history speak for itself.
Let's honor the people who've done the work.
Exactly, and why not? I think that time has come.
Be cool.
For me growing up, I remember growing up here, the importance of the revolutionary history in town. I don't believe, and you can speak to this, I don't know. Is that same history, is that same importance being taught in the schools?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
It just
And-
seemed so significant. Maybe because I
Sure.
was a child.
Yeah.
And they put so much more,
Right.
what you think is significant as a child, your perception is a little different than what it could be as an adult.
And I think that, having taught history for 20 years, it's obviously like you're just getting a survey. You're
Yep.
just getting like the highlights, the bold-faced names,
Yep.
right? But to me, there's lessons to be learned in the lives of the people who were leading the charge to to get the country to become independent. And I think George Washington, one of my favorite things about teaching about George Washington was the fact that he willingly ceded power, right?
Mm-hmm.
For so many years, we didn't have the 22nd Amendment that said you can only serve 2 terms as
Sure.
president, because everyone was like, well, George Washington handed power over.
Yep.
I'm now better than him.
Yep.
I'm going to
Sure.
turn power over. And so that sense of respect for the country and the Constitution and the nation, more so than individual power or individual greed or,
Yeah.
control, is so instructive
Yeah.
and so very important. And so that's those types of things are, you can't deny the significance of the people like Hamilton and Lafayette and,
Yep.
and Washington. But it's also a question of knowing who continued their legacy and who took up the mantle after they
100%.
handed it over.
100%. Well, listen, before we go,
Mm-hmm.
do you want to pitch your ice cream shop in Chatham?
No, it's busy enough. It's good.
Oh, what's the name? Put it out there.
Well, we own Scoops in Chatham, which is great, and
Uh-huh.
it's super busy, and which is really wonderful. And it's the opposite of being a high school principal, right?
Uh-huh.
Because
Sure.
there is no problem in ice cream you can't solve with
Yeah.
more ice cream. And so that's nice. There's problems when you're a high school principal that don't have such easy solutions.
Well, I can assure you there's guys in the production team here.
Yeah, I should have brought them ice cream.
Who will be stopping by in Chatham to see you.
Right, they get a discount. No problem. Thank you. But then also, if anyone is interested in more of, like you said, you can find me on Instagram at the Morristown Project.
Okay, perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Well, listen, Katie, it was a pleasure.
Super fun.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
No, thank you. Listen, as we move into 2026, I would love to sit down with you again.
Sure.
And pick your brain on the revolutionary stuff as we
Sure.
celebrate
Yeah.
the 250th of America, especially
Absolutely.
as Morristown being the ammunition capital.
Totally.
And I would love to pick your brain about that. Maybe we'll do something external. We'll walk around town and look at some key points
That'd be awesome.
in the revolution.
Yeah.
But again, everybody, thank you to Kate Lynch, or Katie McCabe, as
Yeah.
she is referred to now, fellow Morristown High School graduate class of 1989, for Beyond the Green. And special thanks to the staff here at St. Elizabeth's University. My name is Peter. Be good to each other, and we'll see you all soon. Thanks.
Thank you.